The barbed wire had snapped again. Caleb Murphy cursed under his breath as he dismounted from his sorrel gelding, examining the broken fence line that marked the border between his small ranch and the old Henderson homestead. 3 times this month he'd had to repair this same section, and he was starting to suspect his neighbor's abandoned cattle were pushing through deliberately. As he pulled fresh wire from his saddlebags, something made him pause. A sound carried across the Wyoming grassland that didn't belong. A woman's voice, faint but clear, singing an old hymn his mother had loved. Blessed assurance, but sung with such heartbreak that it seemed to rise from the very earth itself. Caleb dropped the wire and followed the sound, his boots crushing dried grass as he walked toward the crumbling stone foundation of the old house. The Henderson place had been empty for 4 years now, ever since the family had given up on farming this harsh land and moved back east. He'd ridden past it countless times, never thinking to investigate the old buildings. The singing was coming from somewhere near what looked like an old root cellar entrance, nearly hidden by overgrown brush and tumbleweeds. Caleb knelt by the weathered wooden boards, pressing his ear against them, and his blood ran cold as the terrible truth dawned on him. Someone was trapped beneath this abandoned property. "Hello?" he called out, his voice rough with shock. "Can you hear me?" The singing stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, Caleb could hear his horse snorting softly, the distant cry of a hawk, and then a whispered response that made his heart hammer against his ribs. "Help me," came the voice, weak but desperate. "Please, someone help me." Caleb's hands shook as he examined the cellar entrance more closely. Heavy wooden planks had been nailed over what must have once been a storm shelter, but now the wood was warped, and some of the nails had worked loose over time. "I'm here," he called back. "I'm going to get you out. What's your name?" A long pause, then, "Emma. My name is Emma." Caleb Murphy was a simple man, a rancher who worked a small spread inherited from his father, fixing fence and tending cattle in the shadow of the Wind River Mountains. He wasn't equipped to handle something like this, but that voice, Emma's voice, had already wrapped itself around his heart like a rope. "Emma, I'm Caleb. How long have you been down there?" I don't know exactly. Years, I think. I tried to keep track at first, but..." Her voice broke. "Are you real? Sometimes I dream that someone comes." Caleb closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd stumbled upon. Someone had imprisoned this woman and left her to die in an underground chamber. The casual cruelty of it made him sick. "I'm real, Emma. I'm going to get you out of there, but I need you to stay calm and talk to me. Are you hurt? Are you alone down there?" "I think I'm alone now," came the hesitant reply. "He hasn't come back in. It feels like weeks, maybe longer. I have water from an old pipe, but no food left." Caleb's jaw clenched. Someone had done this to her. Someone had trapped this woman like an animal and then abandoned her. He went back to his horse and retrieved his knife and a small pry bar from his saddlebags. The work was slow and methodical, prying at boards that had been secured with long nails. But Emma's voice guided him, growing stronger as she sensed rescue approaching. She told him she was from back east, that she'd come west to work as a teacher in Cheyenne. She'd been traveling by train when something had gone wrong. She couldn't remember clearly, but she'd woken up in this underground prison. She spoke of singing to keep herself sane, of scratching marks on the stone wall to count the days, of dreams of open prairie that had kept her alive when everything else had failed. When the last board came free, Caleb peered down into a stone-lined cellar that looked like it had been carved from the earth by early homesteaders. A wooden ladder descended into darkness, and at the bottom, barely visible in the dim light filtering down, he could see her. Emma sat against the far wall, wrapped in what had once been a green dress, now faded and torn. Her blonde hair hung in tangles around her face, and her skin was pale as moonlight. But her eyes were alive, bright with intelligence, and an unbroken spirit that took Caleb's breath away. "You're real," she whispered, staring up at him in wonder. "I'm real," Caleb confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And you're going to be free." Caleb's ranch was a modest spread, a log cabin his grandfather had built, a weathered barn, and enough grazing land for his horses and small herd of cattle. It wasn't much, but it was home, and as he helped Emma down from his horse, he found himself seeing it through her eyes. Getting Emma out of the cellar had taken the better part of 2 hours. Her legs were weak from confinement, and Caleb had to carry her up the ladder rung by rung. pausing frequently to let her rest. When she finally emerged into the afternoon light, she collapsed to her knees in the prairie grass, tears streaming down her face as she lifted her hands to the endless sky. "The sun," she had whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh God, I thought I'd never see the sun again." Now she stood in his doorway, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of open space and natural light. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with handmade furniture and Navajo rugs his mother had loved. To Emma, after years in underground darkness, it looked like a palace. "You can clean up in there," Caleb said, pointing to a small washroom off the main room. I'll find you some clean clothes." Emma nodded, still not quite believing this was real. "Caleb?" she called as he started to leave. "Thank you. For listening. For caring enough to stop." Caleb felt something twist in his chest at the gratitude in her voice. Any decent man would have done the same. "No," Emma said quietly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have convinced themselves they were hearing things and ridden on." While Emma washed, Caleb could hear her crying through the thin walls, great heaving sobs that seemed to contain years of suppressed pain. He rode to the neighboring ranch to use their telephone. He called Doc Harrison in town, explaining the situation as carefully as he could without giving too many details. "Bring her in tomorrow," the old doctor said. "But Caleb, if this is what I think it is, you're going to need to call the sheriff too." "I know, Doc, but she's not ready for that yet. She's barely ready to believe she's safe." When Caleb returned, Emma was sitting at his kitchen table wearing one of his old flannel shirts and a pair of pants he'd found that might fit her small frame. She'd braided her wet hair back from her face, and in the lamplight, he could see how beautiful she must have been before her ordeal. She was still beautiful, he realized, just in a different way. Like a wild flower that had bloomed in a harsh place and learned to find its own strength. "I made coffee," she said, gesturing to the pot on his stove. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to do something. To help." "You don't need to earn your keep here, Emma," Caleb said gently. "You're not a prisoner. You're not obligated to me for anything." Emma turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then what am I?" Caleb considered his answer carefully. "You're a woman who survived something terrible, and you're safe now. That's all that matters." They shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Emma taking small, careful bites as if she still couldn't quite believe the food was real. Caleb watched her, noting the way she startled at sudden sounds, how she positioned herself with her back to the wall, and eyes on the door. "The man who kept you," Caleb said carefully. "Can you tell me about him?" Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "His name was Jeremiah Cross. He said he was a railroad man, traveled the territory on business. That's how he met people, earned their trust." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, as if she were telling someone else's story. Caleb recognized the tone. He'd heard it from men who'd come back from the war, soldiers who'd seen too much and learned to distance themselves from their own experiences. "He said I was too pretty to let go," Emma continued, "that no one would look for a schoolteacher who never made it to her destination. The railroad assumed I'd died in an accident when the train was delayed by floods." "How long, Emma?" 3 years, 4 months, and I don't know how many days. I lost count after the third winter." She set down her fork, her appetite gone. "He came every week at first, brought food, supplies, said things." She shuddered. "But then he started coming less often. These past months he didn't come at all. I thought he was going to let me starve down there." Caleb's hands clenched into fists under the table, but he kept his voice gentle. "He's gone now, Emma. Whatever he did, wherever he is, he can't hurt you anymore." "How do you know?" Emma asked, her voice small. "How do you know he won't come back? How do you know he won't find me here?" Caleb leaned forward, meeting her frightened eyes with steady certainty. "Because I won't let him. Because you're under my protection now, and I give you my word. No one will ever hurt you again while I draw breath." Something in his voice, in the quiet conviction of his promise, seemed to reach Emma in a place that had been locked away for years. For the first time since her rescue, she smiled. A small, tentative thing, but real. That night, Emma slept in Caleb's bed while he took the floor by the fireplace. She woke twice with nightmares, crying out in terror, and both times Caleb was there instantly, talking to her in low, soothing tones until she remembered where she was. "I'm sorry," she whispered after the second episode. I'm sorry for being such trouble. You're not trouble, Emma, Caleb said firmly. You're healing, and healing takes time. The days settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Caleb worked his ranch while Emma slowly regained her strength, helping with small tasks around the cabin. She was afraid to be alone at first, so Caleb arranged his work so he was never far from the house. In the morning, they took Doc Harrison's advice and rode into town. The old physician examined Emma gently, asking few questions but noting everything: the evidence of poor nutrition, the scars on her wrists from restraints, the way she flinched from unexpected touch. Physically, she'll recover, he told Caleb privately. But the other kind of healing, that's going to take longer. She needs stability, safety, people she can trust. You prepared for that kind of responsibility, son? Caleb looked through the window at Emma, who was sitting on the porch watching his horses graze in the pasture, her face turned toward the sun like a flower seeking light. I reckon I am, Doc, he said quietly. Emma had nightmares every night for the first month, but gradually they became less frequent. She was afraid of closed doors, of dark spaces, of the sound of men's voices raised in anger or laughter. Caleb learned to announce himself before entering rooms, to leave lamps burning at night, to move slowly and predictably around her. I used to be brave, Emma told him one evening as they sat on his porch watching the stars appear over the mountains. I traveled alone from Philadelphia to Wyoming Territory. I wasn't afraid of anything. You're still brave, Caleb observed. Maybe braver than before. You survived 3 years in hell and came out still able to sing, still able to trust. That takes more courage than most folks ever need. Emma turned to look at him, this quiet cowboy who had become her anchor in a world that had proven so dangerous. Why are you helping me, Caleb? Really? Caleb was silent for a long moment, watching a coyote move like a shadow across the distant ridge. My wife died 3 years ago, he said finally. Pneumonia took her one winter. Before that, we'd been trying for years to have children, but it never happened. He paused, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. After she died, I figured I was meant to be alone. Stopped believing in much of anything, really. But when I heard you singing, he shook his head. It was like something woke up in me that I thought was dead. Like I'd been waiting my whole life to hear that particular song. Emma felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long she'd forgotten what it was like. The singing kept me alive, she said softly. When everything else failed, when I wanted to give up, I could still sing. It was the one thing he couldn't take from me. As the weeks passed, Emma began to venture beyond the immediate area around Caleb's cabin, first just to the barn to help with the horses, then to the small vegetable garden behind the house, eventually to short rides around the property on Caleb's gentlest mare. She marveled at simple freedoms, the feel of wind in her hair, the taste of fresh vegetables from the garden, the sight of cattle grazing peacefully in open pasture. But the outside world also brought challenges. The sound of approaching riders could send her into panic. Unexpected noises made her freeze with terror. The mere mention of traveling to the nearest town made her break into cold sweats. Caleb navigated these moments with infinite patience, providing escape routes and safe spaces, never making her feel weak or ashamed for her reactions. He read to her in the evenings, adventure stories and poetry from books his wife had loved, anything to fill her mind with beauty instead of darkness. I should write to my family, Emma said one evening, staring at the writing materials Caleb had brought her from town. They think I'm dead. They held a funeral for me. When you're ready, Caleb said gently. How do I tell them I've been alive this whole time? How do I explain that I couldn't escape, couldn't get word to them? Her voice cracked. They've already grieved for me, moved on. Maybe it would be kinder to let them remember me as I was. Emma, look at me. Caleb waited until she met his eyes. Your life has value. Your survival matters. The people who love you deserve to know you're alive, and you deserve to be loved. That night, Emma dreamed of her sister Margaret for the first time in months. Not the nightmares that usually plagued her sleep, but a real memory. Margaret helping her pack for the journey west, both of them excited about the adventure ahead. She woke with tears on her cheeks and Caleb's writing paper in her hands. The letter took Emma 3 days to write. She told her family she was alive and safe, that she'd been hurt but was healing, that she was staying in Wyoming for now with someone who had helped her. She couldn't bring herself to explain the full truth, offering only that she'd been held against her will and had recently been freed. "They'll want to come get me," she told Caleb after he'd posted the letter for her in town. "My father will probably arrive with half of Philadelphia's police force." "Is that what you want?" Caleb asked, though something cold had settled in his stomach at the thought. Emma was quiet for a long time. "I don't know what I want anymore. I know I should want to go home, to be with my family, but the thought of leaving here, leaving you—" She shook her head. "It terrifies me more than staying." 2 weeks later, Emma's family arrived like a cavalry charge. Her father Charles, her brother Robert, and her sister Margaret descended on Caleb's quiet ranch with determination to take their lost daughter home. They'd hired a private detective who'd traced Emma's letter to the local post office, then questioned half the county until someone mentioned the Murphy Ranch. Caleb met them at his gate, watching Emma's face as she was enveloped in embraces and tears. He saw the joy there, but also something else. A kind of overwhelm, as if their intense emotions were too much for her healing psyche to process. "Thank you," Emma's father said to Caleb, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving our daughter. We can never repay you. She saved herself." Caleb replied quietly, "I just heard her song." Over dinner at the hotel in town where Emma's family was staying, Caleb watched the complex dynamics unfold. They spoke about her as if she were still the same person who'd left Philadelphia 3 years ago, making plans for her recovery as if her trauma were something that could be efficiently processed and overcome. "We've already contacted the best doctors in Philadelphia," Robert was saying. "Dr. Matthews specializes in nervous disorders. He's expecting you next week." "And your room is exactly as you left it," Margaret added. "We never changed anything. We were always hoping you'd come home." Emma sat quietly through these discussions, occasionally glancing at Caleb as if seeking reassurance. When talk turned to pressing charges and involving federal marshals, she grew visibly agitated. "I don't want to talk about that yet," she said firmly. "I'm not ready for lawmen and courts and having to relive everything for strangers." "But sweetheart," her father said gently, "the man who did this to you needs to face justice. What if he's hurt other women? What if he comes after me when he finds out I'm alive?" Emma countered, her voice rising. "What if going public puts me in more danger?" Caleb saw the old fear creeping back into her eyes, the way her breathing became shallow and quick. Without thinking, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. The simple touch seemed to ground her, and her breathing slowed. Emma's family noticed the gesture, and Caleb caught the meaningful looks that passed between them. Later, when they'd returned to Caleb's ranch, Emma sat on the porch staring out at the light scattered across the valley below. "They want me to come home tomorrow," she said without preamble. "They've already arranged passage on the eastbound train." Caleb felt his heart sink, but he kept his voice steady. "Is that what you want? They think I'm fragile, broken. They want to wrap me up in cotton wool and keep me safe forever." Emma turned to look at him. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am broken." "You're not broken," Caleb said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference." "How do you know?" Emma asked, her voice small. "Because broken people don't sing," Caleb said simply. "Broken people don't fight to survive for 3 years. Broken people don't trust again." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I trust you," she said finally. "I know. And that's not something a broken person can do." That night, Emma's nightmares returned with a vengeance. She woke screaming, disoriented and terrified, unable to remember where she was. Caleb found her huddled in the corner of the bedroom, convinced that Cross had found her again. It took an hour to talk her back to reality, to convince her that she was safe, that Cross was gone and couldn't hurt her anymore. When she finally calmed down, she was embarrassed and apologetic. "This is why they think I can't take care of myself," she said, wiping her tears. "This is why they want to take me home where someone can watch me all the time." "Emma, listen to me," Caleb said, kneeling in front of her. "Healing isn't a straight line. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes you take steps backward. That doesn't mean you're not getting better." "How do you know so much about healing?" Emma asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Because I've been doing my own healing since you've been here. learning to open up again, to care about someone, to trust my own feelings. You think you're the only one who's been afraid? Emma looked at him with new understanding. You're afraid I'll leave. Terrified, Caleb admitted, but I'm more afraid of asking you to stay for the wrong reasons. You need to make this choice for yourself, not because I need you or because your family needs you. What do you need, Emma? Emma considered the question, really considered it, perhaps for the first time since her rescue. I need time, she said finally. I need to heal at my own pace in my own way. I need to feel safe and supported, but not suffocated. I need to know that my choices are my own. And where do you feel like you can have those things? Emma looked around the small cabin that had become her sanctuary, then back at Caleb's patient, caring face. Here, she whispered. I need to stay here. The conversation with her family the next morning was difficult. There were tears and arguments and gentle accusations that Caleb was taking advantage of Emma's vulnerability. But Emma stood firm in her decision, speaking with a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. I'm not the same person who left Philadelphia 3 years ago, she told them. I can't just slip back into my old life and pretend this didn't happen. I need to build something new, something that honors who I am now. But what about your future? Robert asked. Your career? Your life? This is my life, Emma said, looking at Caleb. Right here, right now, and for the first time in 3 years, I'm choosing it for myself. Her family left that afternoon, disappointed, but eventually accepting Emma's decision. They promised to visit regularly, and made Caleb promise to send word if Emma needed anything at all. After they were gone, Emma and Caleb sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Are you sure about this? Caleb asked quietly. Emma reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. I'm not sure about anything anymore, she said honestly. But I'm sure about this feeling, this peace, this sense that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 3 months after her family's visit, Emma began helping at the local school when the teacher fell ill. Her education and natural patience with children made her a perfect substitute, and she found purpose in helping young minds learn and grow. You have a gift with the frightened ones, the school marm told her one afternoon after Emma had helped a shy boy overcome his fear of speaking in front of the class. You know how to make them feel safe. I know what it's like to be afraid, Emma replied simply. Caleb watched Emma's confidence grow with each passing week. She still had difficult days, times when the weight of her experience seemed too heavy to bear, but they became less frequent. She started sleeping through the night more often. She began to laugh again, real laughter that lit up her entire face. Their relationship remained carefully undefined. They lived together, cared for each other, shared meals and conversations, and comfortable silences. But Caleb was cautious about pushing for more, aware of the delicate nature of Emma's recovery. Do you ever think about courting? Emma asked him one evening as they prepared dinner together. The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Caleb had learned that Emma's mind made connections in its own time. Courting other people? Caleb asked carefully. Courting me, Emma said, not looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. Caleb set down his knife. Emma, I know it's complicated, she said quickly. I know you might see me as damaged, or worry that I'm just grateful and confusing that with something else. But I need you to know that what I feel for you, it's real. Caleb turned to face her fully. I don't see you as damaged. I see you as the strongest person I've ever met, but I also see someone who's been through something terrible, and I don't want to take advantage of that. What if I told you that I've been thinking about this for months? That I've talked to Doc Harrison about it, processed it in ways you can't imagine? Emma met his eyes. What if I told you that choosing to love someone, choosing to trust someone with my heart, feels like the ultimate way of taking my life back? Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a wall he'd built around his own heart finally beginning to crumble. Then I'd tell you that I've been falling in love with you since the day I heard you singing underground, and that I've been terrified of admitting it because I don't want to lose you. You're not going to lose me, Emma said softly. Not unless you send me away. That night, they talked until dawn about love and trauma, about healing and trust, about the delicate balance between protecting someone and empowering them. When they finally kissed, it was with the tenderness of two people who understood that love could be both fragile and fierce. 2 weeks later, Emma received news that would test everything they'd built together. They found him, she told Caleb one evening, her face pale as she held the telegram with shaking hands. Federal marshals found Jeremiah Cross. He's in custody in Denver. Caleb felt a cold fear settle in his stomach. What does that mean for you? They want me to testify, to help build the case against him. Emma's voice was barely audible. They found evidence that there were other women, other victims who didn't survive. The weight of this revelation hit them both like a physical blow. Emma sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd escaped and the responsibility she now felt toward the women who hadn't been as fortunate. I have to do it, she said finally. I have to testify. Those women deserve justice, and I'm the only one who can speak for them. Caleb knelt beside her chair. We'll get through this together, he promised. Whatever you need, however long it takes. What if facing him breaks me? Emma whispered. What if I'm not as healed as I thought? Then we'll put you back together again, Caleb said firmly. As many times as it takes. The trial lasted 4 weeks. Emma testified with a steady voice about her captivity, about Cross's methods of control and manipulation, about the other women she'd heard crying in nearby cells during her early days underground. Caleb stayed by her side throughout the grueling process, providing the anchor she needed to keep from drowning in the memories. Her testimony was crucial in securing Cross's conviction on multiple counts of kidnapping and murder. When the verdict was read, Emma cried, not from trauma this time, but from relief and a sense of justice finally served. It's over, she told Caleb as they walked out of the courthouse in Denver. It's really over. How do you feel? Caleb asked. Emma considered the question. Free, she said simply. For the first time in my life, I feel completely free. A year later, Emma and Caleb were married in the small church in town, with half the county in attendance. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, which Margaret had brought out from Philadelphia, but it was her voice that made the ceremony unforgettable. She sang a traditional hymn during the ceremony, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled guests and out over the rolling hills of Wyoming. It's the same song, Caleb whispered to her after the ceremony. The one I heard that first day. No, Emma corrected, smiling. It's a completely different song. The words are the same, but everything else has changed. They spent their honeymoon camping in the mountains, fishing in crystal-clear streams and sleeping under a canopy of stars. Emma delighted in her freedom to explore, to make choices, to experience beauty without fear. But she was always eager to return to their ranch, to the life they'd built together. 2 years after their wedding, Emma opened a school for children whose families lived too far from town to attend regular classes. The schoolhouse was built on their property, funded partly by the reward money from Cross's conviction and partly by donations from neighboring ranchers who understood the value of education. You're helping these children find their voices, Caleb observed one evening as they watched Emma lead a group of students in song. We all have songs inside us, Emma replied. Sometimes we just need someone to listen for them. The school thrived, educating dozens of children over the years. Emma became known throughout the territory as a gifted teacher, though she always insisted that learning was a journey that couldn't be rushed or forced. On quiet evenings, Caleb would find Emma on their porch looking out over the ranch they'd built together. Sometimes she sang, old hymns and new songs, lullabies and love songs, melodies that spoke of darkness overcome and light embraced. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked her one such evening 5 years after their first meeting. Staying here instead of going back to your old life? Emma reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. This is my life, she said simply. Not the life I planned, but the life I chose. The life we built together from broken pieces and hope. And the singing? Emma smiled, that radiant expression that still took Caleb's breath away. The singing is what saved me, what brought you to me, what continues to heal me every day. It's proof that even in the darkest places, beauty can survive. That night, their house filled with the sound of Emma's voice as she sang their adopted daughter to sleep, a little girl they'd taken in from a family that couldn't care for her, who had her own wounds to heal and her own song to find. The lullaby was an old one, passed down through generations, but Emma had added her own verses. Words about strength and survival, about love that transcends darkness, about the way one voice calling out in the wilderness can change everything. Caleb listened from the doorway, his heart full of gratitude for the day he'd chosen to stop and listen when he heard a voice calling from beneath the ground, for the courage to act when action was needed, for the patience to wait while broken things slowly became whole. In Wyoming, where the wind carries songs across endless grassland and mountains touch the sky, Emma's voice continues. It echoes in the laughter of children learning to read, in the voices of students singing together, in the quiet conversations of couples who have learned that love can bloom even in the aftermath of trauma. And sometimes in the early morning when the world is still sleeping, her voice can be heard drifting across the prairie, no longer a cry for help, but a celebration of hope, a testament to the unbreakable human spirit, and a reminder that even the deepest darkness cannot silence a song determined to be heard.